Oh, Barbara, that's a pleasure. Oh, boy. That's why I have this sitting right here, because without it, I wouldn't have 90 years ago the greatest gift I have ever received was when he, at a young age, born to a Caucasian mother and a black father in the rural area of North Carolina, when he and my mother decided to give birth to 8 of 10 children. I was the 8th and the youngest of 6 girls. Depending on how you want to look at it, 10th of 13 or 8 of 10, but 10 survived into adulthood, and more than 20-some degrees later, bachelor's, master's, doctorates, spiritual depth, and education. And he's the one, the coal miner, who's responsible for it, of course, with my mother, who was a teacher 2 years out of high school, normal school, but in the mines, coal mines of West Virginia, Havoco, Havoco, you can't even find it on the map. But he and my mother decided I would be number 8 of 10. And so my mother's name was Roberta, which is, of course, my daughter's middle name, and Dr. Lynn Roberta Boyles, my oldest brother's daughter, who has her doctorate. Everybody has doctorates or attorney. From the coal mines of West Virginia, Havoco, 1932, up on a hill, down in the valley, the shale and the coal dust. And my father and mother reared 10, moving throughout the coal fields, and I was number 6 in the lineup of girls. They all stood around, I'm told. From my sister, who is now 100, the 2 surviving sisters. Wow, why, God knows, only God knows. She's 100, I'm 19. And they all stood around, I understand, when I was born, and my mother allowed them to hold me in the palms of their hands, because that's how I got the nickname, believe it or not, Tiny. Little late now, but anyway, 90 years ago, Tiny. Or as my oldest sister, Dr. Roberta Boyles Jackson, Little Lee. She always called me Little Lee, because Lee is really my first name. But that's how it all got started, in that circle, right there. George Washington, believe it or not. Now, that was a strange thing, because the doctor and his mother, a young woman, the only daughter of the plantation owner, provided for him, named him, and gave distant relatives provisions and provided for his education, and gave his father $50 to get out of town, because he would surely have been hanged by morning. Remember, this is the late 19th century. And in the rural areas of North Carolina, George Washington Boyles was born, gave birth to me. And so here we are. I think, Barbara, I never thought about it. I just knew that we had no options in my family. Living in a coal mining town, one after another, my mother always knew education and spiritual depth were important. And how it happened, I don't know. My training was to be an English teacher. And fortunately, with the help of some people I should have thanked. I must say to my children always, don't forget to thank people, because I reach back now and I should have thanked them, and I just didn't know to do that then, who twisted my life. There's little bits that's in it in a different direction. And instead of going on to graduate school and teaching, I enjoyed teaching English for 50 years and retired with Professor Emeritus from the State University of New York. But my real contribution has been in my work with women and children and families, for which I was not paid a dime, because you can't pay. The pay for that comes from some other place. Thousands of women, many of whom I will never forget, many of whom that I saw every year for 20-some years at Albion Correctional Facility for Women, when 100 volunteers loaded onto 2 buses and cars and journeyed to Albion with us. That is probably why we went on to build the 20 homes for them, because we couldn't send them upon release back to the rat-infested traps they came out of. We provided for their education, for their psychological help. And you know, of course, many of these women in the 70s and 80s who were loaded into the criminal justice system went there at a terrible time when the drug scourge had taken place, and when cutbacks in the social service network occurred. And on top of that, the Gale trait taking the life. I will never use the word murder. That was what other people chose to use, because we know mothers don't kill themselves. But Gale trait was the impetus for our doing what we did. And so we founded Women for Human Rights and Dignity and went on to build the housing for them, to provide for their education, because you know the common denominator, most of the women entering facilities at the time were not even high school graduates. A lot of fine minds, beautiful women, beautiful physically and intellectually, but got caught up in the wrong thing at the very wrong time. So without a doubt, I have a good feeling, for which I will forever be grateful, that I have been a good steward of God's gifts, with my husband, of course, because I never questioned what I was doing. It just happened, and it just mushroomed, and we were able to do it and to lift people up and give them hope and possibility about what they could do. So I am grateful for that. I think the major challenge always is never enough time to do, because the more you do, the more you're shown what more you can do. There's always more. And some of the biggest blocks, of course, in my work, dealing with the bureaucracy can be a nightmare, and a real nightmare in many different levels. So what normally some people do on one level, maybe I had to do on several levels, because the system was loaded with people who look like me, but we don't make up that portion of the population. And I could almost tell without fail what the background was. People who were unprepared and got caught up in something that they thought would solve their problems. So the biggest problem for me, I think, was probably we could always do more, but I felt good about what we were able to do, only because I had a partner. Only because I had a partner. We never questioned. Arthur Owen Eve, for 66 years, as of June 3rd, 2023. And I'll never understand it, Barbara, because I didn't even know the man that long. I met him undergraduate school. You didn't ask me, but I'm going to tell you. So I will tell you. I met him going to watch him play a basketball game at West Virginia State. He had to leave to go. He went into the Army because the scholarships were canceled. And I saw him when I joined my 4 sisters and my brother at New York University 3 years later, when I had started working on my doctorate, and I was out playing ball with my nephew. We were living on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, and I ran to get the ball, and there, coming up out of the subway on Eastern Parkway, was Arthur Owen. I ran without thinking, and he was with a very attractive young lady, taking her home. I jumped in his arms. He caught me and came back. He said, "I will be back." He said, "I will be back." And he came back 2 hours later, and we sat on the Parkway, Barbara, until 2 in the morning, talking about our lives and what we wanted. I didn't see him except for a couple of movie dates because he was on his way to Buffalo. Shirley Heck and Jim Heck were here. And Shirley, he had befriended Shirley at West Virginia State, so they said, "Come on, we'll help you go to Chevrolet or something. You can find a job." And he came to Buffalo. I think I saw him twice. Went on to teach at Bennett College for women for a year. Came back and he said, "Will you marry me?" And I said, "I will." Nobody gets married like that anymore. But I've been married now for 60-some years. And fortunately, we just never questioned. Somehow we were always on the same page. We grew together. We cried together. We laughed together. We just shook each other together. It's been a wonderful journey, doing a collective impact on other lives. There's no greater feeling. I would say to any young person who is willing to listen, just as we've said, to our own children. And just as I was taught, because my mother knew the only hope for her children, that many children, was a good education and spiritual depth, because spiritual depth is what has always kept us going. That family and the growing together and a good sense of who's in charge of your life, whatever you call him, there's somebody greater than ourselves. But you've got to have the education God gave you the brain for. You've got to do as much as you can with what you have. Don't fall victim to this. Keep your focus. Keep your focus. You can't afford the luxury of failing to focus on what is really critical. Enjoy your life, but stay focused. As Jesse Jackson used to say, keep your eyes on the prize, because that won't fail you. So I would say the 2 most important ingredients that my mother and father instilled in my oldest sister and brother, who worked to transfer down through the family, staying closely, focusing on your education and staying close to whatever higher power you wish. In our case, it's God, unquestionably. And we think we've done that, and we've been very fortunate for that reason. And our kids have every opportunity. I had no idea the suffering that had really gone on to help me get where I got until my adult years. Our children now don't have to wait for that. They need to know the door has been opened. All they got to do is be prepared and run through it, not walk. They can go right through it. The door is open. A lot of people have suffered to make that happen and enjoyed the suffering, believe it or not, because there are days when we cried a lot, but there were days when they were happy tears, happy exhaustion, if there's such a thing. So that would be my suggestion. Keep your eyes on the prize and never fail to tell your parents that you love them. That's why I carry him now, because I never told my mother and father, like my children tell me now. When Malcolm comes to visit, he never lets me close my eyes at night without saying, I love you. Leecia, I love you. Champ, I love you. Martin, I love you, Mom. Eric, Vincent, I love you. We've got to stay together, family, reinforcing respect. That's something that's very important. And Barbara, we can't go wrong. We can't go wrong. A little struggles ahead, but we can't go wrong if we're a good steward of what God has given us, right?